On October 23rd, 2001, Apple introduced the first generation iPod. It came with a 1.8-inch 5GB Toshiba hard drive, which was what allowed it to achieve its small form factor, while still having acceptable battery life and being able to fit, 5 GB. And on top, a FireWire to charge it, a headphone jack, as well as a hold switch. This did not turn on and off the screen. However, by flipping it, you activated the controls. You could navigate through the interface using the scroll wheel, which the Apple decided to use because it would make it easier to navigate through long lists of songs. And also it had some extras such as a clock, calendar, as well as a game. The first generation iPod came with a 2-inch display, which was monochrome, and it also did not work on Windows. The original iPod was only compatible with Mac. The first ever iPod that was compatible with Windows was the second generation iPod, which was introduced on July 17th, 2002. This was pretty much the same as the first generation, although instead of a mechanical scroll wheel, it had a solid-state touch-based scroll wheel. They also changed the thickness. For the second generation iPod, it wasn't the same thickness for all of the models. For the 5GB model, it was the same thickness as the original iPod. For the 10GB model, it was thinner. And for the 20GB model, it was a thicker model. The 5GB model was priced at $299, the 10GB at $399, and the 20GB at $499. On April 28, 2003, Apple introduced the third generation iPod, which was a full redesign. It still uses the solid-state scroll wheel like the previous iPod, although it moved the buttons surrounding it into a line above it and made them all also solid-state buttons. They were also backlit. The third generation iPod also got rid of the FireWire port in favor of the 30-pin dock connector. The third generation came in 10 and 15 gigabytes for the thinner model and 30 gigabytes for the thicker model. In September of 2003, Apple discontinued the 15 and 30 gigabyte models in favor of 20 and 40 gigabyte models. On January 6, 2004, Apple introduced a smaller version of the iPod known as the iPod mini, and it was released on February 20th. The iPod mini used a 1-inch hard drive instead of 1.8 inches, and it also was the first iPod to be available in many different colors, being available in silver, blue, green, pink, and gold. The iPod mini was also the first iPod to have the click wheel, which was basically like the touch-based scroll wheel of the regular size iPod, although the buttons were beneath the scroll wheel, and you just press into it to activate the buttons. On July 19th, 2004, the fourth generation iPod was introduced. It was redesigned with a click wheel from the iPod mini, it had 50% longer battery life, and the pricing was decreased for the 20 gigabyte model to $299 and for the 40 gigabyte model to $399. On October 26, 2004, Apple introduced a U2 edition of the iPod for $349 with a black front, red click wheel, and the signatures from the members of U2 on the back. Apple also introduced the iPod Photo, a version of the fourth generation iPod with a color display. This color display was still 2 inches, although it was at a higher resolution of 176 by 220, and it was able to display pictures. The iPod Photo had longer battery life at 15 hours, and it was also available in bigger storage sizes. It was priced at $499 for the 40 gigabyte model, and also had a 60 gigabyte model available for $599. On February 23, 2005, Apple reduced the price of the iPod Photo, replacing the 40 gigabyte model with a 30 gigabyte model, which was slimmer and also priced at $349, and reducing the price of the 60 gigabyte model to $449. Apple further reduced the pricing of the iPod Photo when they decided to completely replace the monochrome iPod with the Photo on June 28, 2005, introducing a 20 gigabyte model for the same price as the 20 gigabyte monochrome iPod, and reducing the price of the 60 gigabyte model further to $399. Apple also introduced the iPod Photo, a version of the fourth generation iPod with a color display. This color display was still 2 inches, although it was at a higher resolution of 176 by 220, and it was able to display pictures. The iPod Photo had longer battery life at 15 hours, and it was also available in bigger storage sizes. On February 22nd, 2005, Apple introduced the second generation iPod mini. It had longer battery life, a 6GB variant, and brighter colors. On January 11th, 2005, Apple released its third lineup of iPods, which was the iPod Shuffle. The iPod Shuffle was smaller and more affordable than the iPod mini, and it achieved the smaller form factor by using flash storage as opposed to a hard drive like the regular and mini iPods did. It looked somewhat like a USB flash storage with a built-in USB connector to attach it to the computer. It did not have a built-in display, although it did have a control pad to go to the next or previous song, as well as to increase or decrease the volume and to pause or play the music. The iPod Shuffle had a built-in switch to switch it between playing the music in order or on shuffle mode. It did not have a built-in clip on the first generation model. A bigger upgrade was when they replaced the iPod mini line with the iPod Nano. The iPod Nano used flash memory instead of a 1-inch hard drive like the iPod mini. This meant that the Nano was only available in 1, 2, or 4 gigabytes, getting rid of the 6 gigabyte variant, although it was able to be smaller, being only 40 millimeters wide and 6.9 millimeters thick. The iPod Nano also came with a color display at 132 by 176 resolution at a size of 1.5 inches. It did have slightly shorter battery life than the second generation iPod mini. On October 12, 2005, Apple released the iPod Video. The iPod Video was the first iPod capable of video playback. For video playback, it had a larger 2.5-inch display with a higher 240 by 320 resolution. It was also the first full-size iPod available in multiple colors, being available in white or black. The iPod Video was available in 30 gigabytes for $299 and 60 gigabytes for $399. And on September 12, 2006, this was revised with a 30 gigabyte model for $249 and an 80 gigabyte model for $349. The second generation iPod Shuffle was a full redesign. It was the first iPod Shuffle to come with a clip. And to do this, they moved the switch on the back to the top. And they also did the USB connector for a dock that used the headphone jack to connect it to your computer and to charge it. The second generation iPod Nano came with a full aluminum body instead of having plastic on the front and chrome on the back like the previous iPods. The second generation iPod Nano also increased the storage capacities to 2, 4, and 8 gigabytes compared to 1, 2, or 4 gigabytes, and had 24 hours of battery life compared to 14 for the previous one. Apple introduced 3 new iPods on September 5th, 2007. The iPod Classic was a successor to the iPod Video with an aluminum front as opposed to the plastic fronts of the previous iPods. It was also available in black or silver as opposed to the black or white options of the previous iPods. The iPod Classic came with larger storage options of 80 or 160 gigabytes and longer battery life of 30 hours for the 80 gigabyte model and 40 hours for the 160 gigabyte model. The iPod Nano was also refreshed, introducing video playback capabilities. For this, Apple did a full redesign of the iPod Nano to introduce a bigger display, making it more square and shorter. With this redesign, Apple was able to introduce a 2-inch display at a resolution of 240 by 320. Apple also reintroduced the stainless steel back from the original iPod Nano as opposed to the aluminum back of the iPod Nano second generation. Steve Jobs referred to the iPhone as the most powerful iPod that Apple had made, although buying it required getting a 2-year contract with AT&T, and also the phone hardware made it thick and expensive, which was why Apple introduced the iPod Touch. This brought over much of the technology from the iPhone, such as the 3.5-inch 320 by 480 multi-touch display, as well as the iPhone OS, running iPhone OS 1.1. Of course, it did not have the App Store. This was not introduced until the next year. But it did have Safari as well as YouTube because it was the first iPod to support Wi-Fi. It did not, however, support Bluetooth, and it did not have a built-in speaker, instead only having a piezoelectric buzzer like the previous iPods. So it can make clicks like that. It could not play music. It also did not include the camera from the iPhone, and of course did not have cellular data. The iPod Touch came with 8, 16, or 32 gigabytes of flash storage and was available starting at $299. Thank you for watching History of the iPod Part 1, and subscribe if you want to see Part 2 and more videos like this.